Hi, my name is Reed Silverne. The name of this show is Fed Pride. The reason it's called Fed Pride is because I'm a federal worker, retired, and proud of it. Today for me, it's February 15th. For you, it's probably February 20th or 27th or March, anytime in March. Right now, I tape my show once a month, and then you can watch it or just happen to turn it on anytime during the following month. As a result, anything I talk about is most likely going to be completely obsolete. I'm going to turn myself off and then spin the world a little bit just to show that I am on Google Earth and control the world, at least as far as the show is concerned. Today I'm going to talk about two astro-terran events that have roiled the world and hit the news just today and yesterday, which means by the time you watch it, the news is going to be so old you're probably not going to remember it. But the good news is that when I talk about this, it'll seem like it's new because it probably didn't enter your consciousness while it was going on. Today, an asteroid of 160,000 tons, 130,000 metric tons, passed so close to the Earth that it was within our geosynchronous satellites, which means our communication satellites, and the Earth itself. I'm going to turn myself off, and I'm going to do a computer simulation. So basically, there's Australia, and the asteroid came in around like this, and then the Earth's gravity actually turned it and changed its orbit. The name of the asteroid was DA-17. I'm not sure I have the right thing over here. It's kind of an amazing thing because it's the second asteroid to come near the Earth. DA-14, I apologize. So DA-17 is a different asteroid. So anyway, this asteroid has come within 17,200 miles of Earth, and it's 160,000 tons, 150 feet wide, and a little larger than the asteroid from what we call the Tunguska event. I'm going to make this a little larger so we can get this around me a little bit. And we're going to go to the other side of the world. Right there is Siberia. And in 1908, an asteroid, or it wasn't an asteroid, it was a very large meteor, but about 100 feet in width, 100,000 tons, actually came into our atmosphere and exploded over this part of what was then Russia. It was before the Soviet Union even existed. And it flattened 825 square miles, about the same size as Rhode Island or Orange County, California, and flattened an entire forest. It was the equivalent of a 2.5 megaton bomb, came down on land. If it had landed in Los Angeles, it would have destroyed all of Orange County. Or if it had landed in Orange County, it would have destroyed the entire county of Orange, south of LA, 2 million people strong. And probably devastated all of California, knocked out power, and who knows what else. If it had landed in the ocean, it would have caused a major tsunami event, depending on which ocean it did. Probably at least as strong as the one that killed 200,000 people. But it landed in the middle of nowhere. I believe that an archaeologist or a scientist happened to be in the area a little bit later and walked over there. And there were a couple Inuit or Alouette type people, tribal people, who actually saw the explosion and described it to cameras in the 1910s and 20s a little bit later. They found a crater in a swampy area, and that was a hit. So there are 500,000 asteroids in the order of 100 to 200 feet wide, or 100 to 300 feet wide. And those asteroids actually hit the Earth once every 1,200 years. So since it hit in 1908, I figure we're not due. But this is the closest that I've heard about since I started following it when NASA started its near Earth asteroid program, or NEA program. So right now, NASA is looking at, I don't know how many, hundreds of different asteroids that it thinks are going to have an orbit near the Earth. And unfortunately, this wasn't one of them. This was discovered on the 23rd of February in 2012. So they've known about it about a year. And if it was going straight toward the ocean right next to California, which would have tsunamied California, or right into the Gulf of Mexico, in case it would have tsunamied the entire Gulf Coast, they might have had to try to figure out what to do about it. But it came 17,000 miles away. Just last month, they had another asteroid that was basically continent-destroying size. That particular asteroid is called Apophis. It passed in the middle of January, which is just last month, and it was 9 million miles away. But that particular asteroid in 2029 is going to come as close as this much smaller one that just near hit, which, thank God, which means it's a miss. Near miss means it's a hit, so I hope we never have a near miss. And that one comes back in 2029, and it will be within 20,000 miles. That one will be closer than our satellites, our communication satellites. Communication satellites are set up to be 22,000 miles away because just the way physics happens to work, if it's 22,000 miles away, it stays exactly the same distance and stays over the exact same spot constantly, no matter what. And that's called geosynchronous orbit. So most of our satellites, the really important ones, are in geosynchronous orbit. The ones like Sky or DirecTV, those satellites are in geosynchronous orbit. And we have another satellite program, which is low Earth orbit, or LEOs. And those are tiny little satellites that whiz around because the closer it is to Earth, the faster they go. And they whiz around the Earth very, very quickly, but they use cell phone technology to go from satellite to satellite to satellite. So if they put enough of them, 18, I forgot, I don't know the exact number, but if they have enough of them whizzing around, then there's basically one within cell phone distance or cell tower distance of any spot in the Earth. And that's what they use for satellite telephones and things like that. So that's basically it in a nutshell, but it's still an amazing thing. The big one, which is 1,000 feet wide, it's called Apophis, came within 9 million miles of the Earth last month. So, and I don't know how long they've known about it, but if it hits, it would be a disaster, because the thing is, it would hit the Earth. If Apophis actually hit, it'll come within 20,000 miles of the Earth in 2029. If it actually hit the Earth, it would have the power of a billion megatons. Or no, a million megatons or a billion tons. So it would be the equivalent of a million megaton bomb. Now, I think the largest nuclear bomb they've ever set off was a Russian a Russian bomb, and I think that was 50 megatons. So think of 200 of the largest megaton H-bombs that you could think of, all going over the same spot at the same time. That hit the water, it would be bad. Let me just put it that way. Fortunately, that one will come as close as this one came, or almost as close, within our geosynchronous satellites in 2029. And after that, its closest approach is 14 million miles, and then I guess it's not an immediate worry. But that one is called Apophis, and Apophis is an evil Egyptian serpent god. Swings by every 7 years, and hopefully will miss the Earth for a long time. And when you really think about this stuff, it's pretty shocking. Now, an Apophis type thing, a real civilization buster, hits the Earth about every 30 to 60 million years. We might be slightly overdue because the last one destroyed the dinosaurs in 65 million BC. So and that hit in the Yucatan Peninsula right there. So this is very, very interesting to me. I've been following it for a while. I don't think the apocalypse is going to happen. I don't think that events in the Middle East are leading to an apocalypse in 2029 or at any other time. However, a very, very slight miscalculation, although that doesn't seem to be happening for Apophis or something like that, or if it kind of wings another asteroid or does something changes its orbit a little bit, it's not that different to move another 20,000 miles, in which case we would have to really do some Armageddon-like maneuvers to try to get that stopped. Meanwhile, in an event that's supposedly completely separate, it's supposed to have nothing to do with anything, certainly nothing to do with this medium-sized asteroid that almost hit the Earth, just hit the Volga or the Ural region, which is right about there in a town called Chelyabinsk, which is actually a pretty big town, industrial town in the middle of the kind of rust belt of Russia. A 10-ton meteor flashed over that town, and unless they're very, very big, and even the Tunguska one, which was 100 feet wide and 100,000 tons, when they hit the atmosphere, they're coming in at 17,000 miles an hour. That's almost unbelievably fast. So it's coming in much faster than any bullet, 17,000 miles an hour. And it hits the atmosphere, especially if it comes in on an angle. They have a tendency to just explode. And this one did. And I don't have the, if you go on the internet and get on CNN and you put Russian meteor, you can click up a YouTube video. And the YouTube video will show something coming over like a streak, and then a shadow, and then a very bright light, and then a tremendous boom when it blew up. And it blew up right over this town, and the shock wave from the explosion basically destroyed all the windows in 3,000 buildings. So it was a pretty big town. So 3,000 buildings, the windows shattered, and over about 1,000 people ended up in the hospital, mostly with broken glass wounds. I think 42 ended up needing to stay in the hospital. I'm not sure exactly what their wounds were. Nobody seems to have died, but the whole town, to say the least, is shaken by it. And it's just one of those astro-Terran events that happens every now and then. And that kind of thing, that level event, happens every couple of years, but usually in places that are not inhabited. So we have the 10-ton meteor, which broke up into a bunch of tiny little meteorites that are probably all that meteor hunters are all looking for right now. And then you have the 100 to 300 foot distance, and that destroys 1,000 to 3,000 square miles. If that hits a city, it's vaporized, basically flattened. And if it hits the ocean, then you have a tsunami event. And then you have this situation where you got an entire, 160 million ton events like this Apophis. And that one is 20 million tons. And I believe it's 1,000 feet wide. And on top of that, when it hits like 1 billion tons of TNT or 1 million megatons. So that is a lot of trouble, to say the least. So that's what's going on, and that's just part of what's going on in the world. And meanwhile, we have our own terrestrial problems and the same old problems we probably had that I was talking about last week. And that is, last time it was a fiscal cliff that was going to hit December 31st, 2012, and on January 1st, you were going to have a series of events. You were going to have a default. You were going to have a sequester. And then you needed a continuing resolution as well. Those were kicked down the line except for the increase of the debt ceiling. So we didn't have a default, and we're not going to have one. And everything was kicked down. The can was kicked down for 3 months or 2 months. And there's still a sequester event at the end of February and a government shutdown, potential government shutdown, which is a continuing resolution because they can't come to a budget agreement between the Republican House and the Democratic Senate. So we have the same problems that we had a couple months ago, although the Republicans are not threatening to not raise the debt limit this time and force us into default. So what are the Republicans looking for? Basically, they're looking for leverage. And leverage to do what? Well, they really haven't changed their tune. They still want to voucherize Medicare. They want to privatize Social Security. And as long as we have a very high deficit, they have the excuse to do that. And they say they need to do that because they won't raise taxes. And last time the Republicans blinked, and they ended up being forced because the Democrats had passed a bill in the Senate, and they ended up having to raise the maximum tax rate from 35% to 39%. 39.6%, over $400,000 of income. And they had to raise the long-term capital gains from 15 to 20%. And they also got rid of the payroll tax holiday. That raised about $150 billion a year. Most of the other things that were involved, which was the doc fix, in other words, they've been raising the rates that they give to doctors above what was legally prescribed on a temporary basis every year. So that would have gone down. I think it's now about 20% or 18%. And a lot of doctors would have stopped working with Medicare and Medicaid as a result. So they got that passed. But I think that was in the calculation anyway. So the budget deficit for 2013 estimation by CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, is already down to 800 billion, which is half at its max. That 2009 year, which was really a Republican year because the 2009 fiscal year budget starts in September 2008 and is passed before that. That was $1.6 trillion deficit. Now we're in 2013, we're going to be down to 800 billion. And if the sequester happens, we might be down to 700 billion. But the sequester is the dumbest way to cut $100 billion in spending. And that came from the crisis in 2011 when the Republicans wouldn't raise the debt limit, where within a day we were going to go into default. And within that day, an agreement was made to kick the can down using a committee, a bipartisan committee. And if the bipartisan committee didn't cut, I think it's $2 trillion over 10 years, which is $200 billion a year, there was going to be the sequester. And the sequester was going to reduce $1 trillion over 10 years, but in that case, it's about $100 billion a year. And everybody thought that the bipartisan commission would get together and that they would make their cuts and that the sequester would never come through. Well, the bipartisan commission collapsed, and the Republicans blamed the Democrats and ended up getting blamed themselves. And sure enough, right after the election, the fiscal cliff happens, and part of the fiscal cliff is this sequester. So they extended the sequester, or put it away for 2 months, and now it's coming back up. So what does the sequester do? The sequester cuts defense by 10% and domestic spending by 5%. No, defense by 8%, domestic 5%. Over fiscal year 2013, but it cuts it across the board. Well, because we put it forward and we didn't, create a budget at the beginning of the fiscal year, March 1st to September 1st is 6 months. So all those cuts have to be concentrated into 6 months, which means that every program gets cut in defense by 13%. But without any thought behind it, without just saying, well, let's get rid of the F-35 and then we'll be able to keep everything else going. It's a cut of every single thing by a certain percent, which of course makes no sense at all, and which was the incentive not to do it. Similarly, on the domestic side, everything is now going to have to get cut 8 to 9%, and that means that there's going to be a cut of Head Start. There's going to be a cut of all the federal workers. They're going to have to put them on furlough. The meat inspectors are going to be on furlough 11 days a year, or 11 days in the next 6 months, or whatever the number is. And they're not going to be inspecting meat. There might be a meat shortage. So there's all kinds of really dumb results. Now, Congress could just get together and say, well, let's just give each agency, especially the Defense Department, discretion. If they would just pass that, then the Defense Department could say, oh, I'm just going to cut 1 or 2 real big programs or postpone them till after the fiscal year is over, and then all the soldiers will continue to get all their salaries. We won't cut the Navy budget. We'll still be able to send our cruisers and our aircraft carriers to Iran and so on and so forth. But now, with the sequester looming, they're basically saying this is going to affect our national security if you guys don't get it together. The Republicans say, let's not cut any defense and let's cut Social Security and Medicare, which is not included in the sequester at all. The Democrats are saying, let's increase revenues again and cut loopholes and end subsidies to farmers and to oil companies, which the Republicans won't do. So that's the kind of thing that is looming and probably will be going on during the month that you may or may not be watching this show. My name is Reed Silverne. Name of this show is Fed Pride. The reason it's called Fed Pride, because I'm a federal worker retired. Thanks for watching.